On this episode of Hands on Cars,
Kevin shows you how to prep a car and paint booth before giving you great tips and tricks as he sprays base coat and clear on the Camaro with the Eastwood Concours Pro paint gun.
Hey guys, Kevin Tetz for Hands on Cars. Well, the day is finally here. Project Z Sled is prepped, it's primed, it's blocked, and it's ready for paint. After months and months of work, we are finally here, and I'm so stoked I can't believe it. We're gonna show you how to shoot paint and give you tons of other tips on how to get yourself out of trouble and how to do proper paint prep, including masking. And I get to try out my new Concours Pro spray gun, as well as show you guys how the new Eastwood 4-to-1 Premium Show Clear lays down on a vehicle like this. Now, the vehicle is mostly masked up, but we left some spaces to show you how we did it, because it's basically the same technique. Let me show you what I did. Obviously, all of the panels are off of the car. We're doing this because we're shooting a solid color, and I don't want any tape lines, and I don't want to have to spend the time jamming it out, backmasking, and all that kind of stuff. This saves us time. Different color, metallic color, graphics, well, that's a different strategy. I've made paper doors to keep the overspray from the inside, to keep the dust from blowing into the outside, and I've skirted the entire vehicle all the way around to keep that overspray off of the newly painted suspension components. Now, these parts are sitting on a stand that I've had for years. It allows me access to all the areas I want to paint on these parts. If you don't have something like this, well, you can get creative with your MiG 175 and make your stands. The point is, this eliminates the time investment in masking and eliminates the possibility of tape lines as well. So it's a good idea. Now, the front subframe you've seen before, it's freshly painted and it's completely assembled. So I've bagged it to keep overspray off of it, as well as I've masked the firewall because I painted it as well. We'll show you that in a little bit. But I wanted to say that your goal in masking is to keep your paper as smooth as possible. That way you don't have folds and areas that your overspray can collect in and possibly get blown back out into the paint job. Areas like this. It's really worth the time investment to give it a good inspection and come back, flatten out spots like that. Just eliminates problems. In almost every instance on this car, I used a technique called backmasking or back taping. Now, this technique is clearly demonstrated in a Paintucation instructional series, but in case you haven't watched it, I want to show you what I'm talking about. I like to use 1.5 inch tape, and basically what I'm doing is using about half of it on the inside edge, and it's self-explanatory. I'm back taping and exposing the sticky part of the tape. It makes it really easy to blanket this with another piece of paper and use the sticky part of the tape. It just makes a nice job attaching. But I also like to use a little bit of reinforcement, kind of like building a web. So I go like this. I'm under here. And you can see what this is going to do. It gives a little bit of an area of support for the masking paper that we're going to put in here, just in case. It allows it to, if you drop a tack rag on there, it's not going to crash this stuff all in. And now I take a very sharp single-edge razor blade and I'm lightly cutting just the paper, not the masking tape underneath. Last step is to take some of the masking tape and again, sticky part of the tape to the sticky part of the tape. Makes this really easy. Now this fender has been prepped and sanded exactly the same way as the rest of the parts that you just saw in the spray booth. And I've got it mounted on my super stand so I can get access to the back sides of the panels and the jambs so I don't have any overspray or tape lines when I assemble this car. Now this fender obviously hasn't been prepped at all. It's in Eastwood high build 2K primer surfacer in black, and although it's been body worked, it's nice and straight. It's not prepped, it's not ready for paint, so we're going to show you exactly how we did it. Now, there's a difference in the strategy between a solid color and a metallic color. This, obviously, is getting a solid color. It's getting a black paint job. So, solid color you can get by with 400 grit being your last stage of sanding. If you're spraying a metallic, you want to finish off with 600 grit. That way, the metallic particles don't end up in those sand scratches and stand up and look weird. So, we're going to prep for 400 on this panel. Now the goal is to finish off with 400 grit, but I'm going to start with 320. Now this technique is going to tweak some of you hardcore restoration guys if you're watching, but I have a collision repair background, so I know how to sand with machines properly, and if you don't abuse a dual action sander, it can really help you out. This is flat, this is not. This is flat, this is flat. It's a mating surface. So I'm going to show you how to use a DA sander to where you don't carve up your panel or round off any corners. Start off with a relatively low speed on your sander and just sand the flat parts. This technique is about saving time and creating a very flat surface for your paint to sit on. You notice I'm using a light touch and only sanding the flat surfaces. The DA sander will damage the peaked edges and create distortion on curved surfaces, so you gotta stop when your flats are sanded. Now this is the same grit, 320 on a soft sander. You can see what I did, but more importantly, you can see what I didn't do. I didn't ride my style lines. I didn't ride my convex and complex shapes. That's for hand sanding, but we just bought ourselves a bunch of time and saved ourselves a bunch of rubbing. So now, I can use blocking techniques. One of the things I really like about the Eastwood Black 2K primer is that it acts as its own guide code, and you can tell when you've sanded through. You can tell when you're done with this step. And watch my technique. The block face is rounded slightly, and I'm rolling with this curve. Like I said, we've done our body work. The panel's shaped like we wanted, and it's nice and straight where it needs to be nice and straight. So I don't want to change that by sanding. Spent a lot of time priming and blocking, and we don't want to go backwards. We don't want to rob ourselves of having done all of that hard work. And on these peaked style lines, I've found that if they're too crisp, sometimes they look a little weird. So when I'm done blocking, I skate over them just a little bit, just to mute that peaked edge, and it's still nice and straight, but it looks just real clean and real crisp, and just one step above factory. Your tendency is going to be to grab the air hose and blow the dust off and see if you've still got some stuff to sand. I want to change your mind on this. The most obvious benefit is that we're not surrounded by a cloud of sanding dust that I'm sucking up into my lungs. The other benefit is that the dust is gone, and now I can see if I'm finished sanding yet. I've got a couple of holidays here, some stuff on the top, so I need to keep going just a little bit longer with 320. But here's the real point of using a shop vac for extraction. If you hit it with an air hose, there's a chance that you can blow that sanding dust into a pinhole if you've got filler work and you didn't know it was there. It's going to show up in your paint job and cause you problems, cause you a solvent crater or a fisheye. By extracting the dust, you pull it out of those pinholes and they'll show themselves to you before you paint. Think about it. So now that I've got the surface exposed, sanded into, I'm going to start using gloves, because if it's a hot and sweaty day, the sweat and the acid from my fingers can be deposited into the paint job and come up through that clear, especially on a black. Ask me how I know. So we're going to start with 400. So 400 is the same drill. But interestingly enough, when you change grits and you've sanded thoroughly, the look of the panel changes. So again, the black 2K primer from Eastwood acts kind of as its own guide code, even as you're switching grits moving up through your project. The red scuffing pads work great for inconsistent areas like this because you still want the paint to stick. You don't want it to peel off, and if it's not sanded, it's not going to stick. So these make short work of these types of areas. You can fold it over, do your inner crevices and cracks. And just like I say in the Paintucation DVDs, the harder it is to sand, the more important it is to sand it. Places like this is not where you want delamination when your car's put together and going down the road. I'm using my 400 to hand sand. If I block sand across this is just a line from the inner fender being pressed. Well, I'm going to knock the top off. I'm not getting down in the groove. So with the gloves, with the finger sanding, I can get down in here and prep these surfaces. Okay, here's a problem that you might have. If you remember, we put filler on these edges to close up our panel gaps. And look here, there's a low spot. So if I get in there with a sanding block and I block that flat, well, I've changed the fitment of the fender to the hood. I've created a gap there. So this is a technique I want to show you on how to get away with that. You can fill that in and it won't show up in your paint job when you open up that hood. This is a Contour polyester glazing putty and the catalyst that goes with it. And this is a razor blade. The reason I use a razor blade is so I can get a very small amount and a little bit of catalyst, and I can mix it up. A little bit more catalyst. Feeling like Bob Ross here, but I can mix it up and get a very small amount and go in and fix that pinhole with a very, very tiny amount. And I can judiciously apply it with my razor blade. Very flat. It's a minimal amount. So my filler's been sitting for a couple of minutes. It's sort of hard. I've got 320 on a block and Eastwood pre-painting prep. Now here's where you got to know the rules before you can break them. This is dry sanding paper and this is a wet solvent, but this is going to work. So I'm using my pre-painting prep and a wet sanding situation. And what that does is allow me to fill the low spot. The solvent activates the filler, but not the cured primer around it. So I'm not digging into the sides. I'm filling in and I'm leveling and I'm doing it quick. And now I'm ready for a sealer and top coat, and you're never going to know that space was there. And just to explain it again, my filler is much softer than the cured primer around it. The solvent makes it even softer, so it makes it easy for me to level this piece down, not affect the edge around it, not affect my panel fit between two panels, and I fill in my pinhole. So it's just a nice technique, and one that you can get away with something to where it's not really the intended purpose of that product, but it works great. All right, now we're going to wipe it down, get it wet, see what it looks like. Got to get the first layer of dust off first before you wet check with the final wipe solvent. Now the last final step that I like to do on something like this before paint is to wash it with soapy water. Use dishwashing soap too, because it cuts the grease. But before we do that, I wanted to show you our cool custom Z28 side vents. From the factory, these Z28 side gills went on from the outside, and to me they always had kind of a cheap look because it's a cast metal, it's not that great, and it kind of bulges up. So all we did was figure out a clamping mechanism from the back side and mounted them from the reverse, and it's such a clean, tasty, tidy look that cost nothing.
Hands on Cars is brought to you by the Eastwood Company. When you're restoring a car, truck, or motorcycle, Eastwood has everything you need to do the job right. Eastwood, since 1978.
Now this is just a pump sprayer that you can get from a home center. What's in it is a dust control spray that you can get from a body shop supply. It just does a nice job of keeping the dust down in between coats, but with the actual dust control spray from the body shop, it stays wet through the whole paint job. If you don't want to spend the money on this, then you can just use the pump sprayer with water and do it between coats. It keeps you from having to run a hose in your booth. It keeps the floor damp, and it keeps that overspray from being recirculated and deposited back down into your paint job. Now this stuff has nothing to do with paint, but it has everything to do with controlling the outcome of your paint job. It's obvious what this stuff does. It kills bugs. So whether I'm painting in a spray booth or just an open shop environment, I always pop the top on a couple of those guys the night before I'm going to spray. It just helps you control that environment. One other thing. Before I put anything into my spray area, again, whether it's a booth or a shop, I vacuum it like it's a hospital operating room. Get that stuff off the floor. Control your environment. Keep those things from coming up into the paint job. And a shop vac is one of the best things that you can have around your shop for paint booth prep. Whenever I'm prepping a vehicle or parts for a paint job, I use a 3-step cleaning process, starting with a glass cleaner, which is a nice organic debris cleaner. I follow that with a prep solvent wipe down. Pre-painting prep is a good one. And then finally, before I shoot paint, I use an alcohol wipe down in a pump sprayer. The alcohol gets very aggressive things like acidic fingerprints up off of the substrate, and it works as a very nice anti-static spray as well. And remember, don't use paper towels as a final wipe. Spend a little extra money on some Body Shop safe, lint-free towels. It's money well spent. Step 1 of the 3-step process is the glass cleaner. Okay, just to prove a point, as clean as that car looked, look what I picked up off the surface. You're not ready even if it looks clean. You gotta clean it. Here's the other thing, this one's done. It's gone, get a new one. You're gonna spend a little money on towels, but you're gonna have a clean surface. Step 2, after the glass cleaner, is pre-painting prep. You wanna wipe one direction. Roll your rag. You're trying to evacuate the solvent off the top, not rub it in. Again, second stage. Look at the dirt I'm picking up. This is why 3 stages of prep. It's why it's so important. You gotta be clean, baby. Your final wipe solvent also gives you the opportunity to test for straightness. It's another way to wet check. The last of the 3 steps is the alcohol wipe down. Now keep in mind, this is isopropyl alcohol, not rubbing alcohol. It's a 75% alcohol, 25% water mix that I get from a local drugstore. What that does, rather than rubbing alcohol, is it has a higher flash point. What does a higher flash point mean? Well, you're not going to blow yourself up if you have a static charge on the surface, like fiberglass or something like that. So keep safe, use the 75-25 isopropyl alcohol. Smells minty fresh. And look at that. Where do I keep picking up dirt? I don't know, but I keep cleaning until my rags come off clean. That one's toast. The car's prepped, we're ready to start spraying. We're using a 3-step system, starting with the Eastwood 1-to-1 epoxy as a sealer coat, the Boulevard Black Basecoat, which is our color for Z-Sled, and the new 4-to-1 Premium Show Clear. Now, we're using a sealer, even though the primer is black, because as you can see, I've sanded through some of the spots. The sole purpose of a sealer is to get an even ground coat for the color, so I don't have to stack up my color and put too much on. So we start off with a black ground coat, then go to our color, then go to clear, which is the shiny stuff. Let's get some epoxy on there. This is a 1-to-1 mix ratio, which is just all that says is equal parts. So that goes up to the 5, and I take the part B, which is the catalyst, and I pour it in up to the 10. And then I stir it and spray it. It's that simple. I really prefer the mixing cups because even though they're tapered sides, they've got all the divisions and you get a proper mix ratio. If you use a mixing stick like this and you just stick it down in your cup, well, the sides are tapered. So as it goes up, the volume changes, your mix ratio changes, and you always want to be accurate. So what I do is use a mixing cup, and I drop in my PPS liner, throw in a strainer, always, and then I strain into the cup liner, pop on the top. Now I'm ready to shoot. So let's talk about gun setup. This is my Concours Pro. I've got the air valve at the bottom wide open, the fan wide open, and fluid delivery at the back end of the extent of the trigger. Everything's wide open until I start spraying. Let's set up air pressure. This is the Eastwood digital air pressure gauge. It's a really nice piece, but I don't like spraying with it because it gets in my way, just like this gauge here. This is a passive gauge. Look it. It's just a brass T inlet, outlet, and a monitor. This will tell me where I've arrived at my perfect air pressure, and then I can remove this and spray without this in the way. Let me show you. With the trigger fully pulled, the gun wide open. Looking at the gauges side to side, I get my 30 pounds at the gun inlet, which is actually 33 pounds at the wall regulator. So now that I know I've got an accurate 30 psi at the trigger with a fully pulled trigger, now I can get rid of this thing and have a comfortable spray experience. Also want to mention, I'm using giant HVLP fittings. They're a little more expensive than your typical NPT or quarter-inch fittings, but the difference is night and day in your spraying, guys. You've got to invest in the high-flow fittings. And that includes your air hose 3/8 ID and your 3/8 ID couplers. Now, we're ready to spray, but I'm not ready to spray. Look at this. I just wiped the car down. I got a bunch of dust and stuff on me. Let's go clean up. A booth box is real important. It's got masking tape, tweezers, a bug pick, single-edge razor blades, some touch-up brushes in case I need them, and my glasses because I'm old and I can't see. It also gives me a place that's clean to keep my tack rags for wiping down between coats. I let my tack rag sit opened up for a few minutes to mute the sticky so it doesn't stay on the panel. For the first tack wipe, I use a blow nozzle set at about the same pressure as I spray. This blows out any dust particles and debris into the tack rag and gets it out of the cracks and crevices. Lastly, I ball up the tack rag loosely and give the panels a final tacking just for good measure. I keep a test panel in the booth to check my pattern before spraying. I never test it against the wall. It's just bad practice and looks messy. Once the pattern looks good, like a squash football, it's time to spray. The epoxy goes down first with a single wet coat. I start on the roof, working my way to the middle with a 50% overlap to keep the coat even and wet. My gun has a 1.3 fluid tip in it, and I stay about 5 inches from the surface. I move to the quarter panel and work my way up to the sail panel, then to the other quarter, working my way up the car against the airflow of the booth. The doors and every other surface gets the same coat of epoxy, which is a color sealer, but also helps with adhesion of the paint. And don't be afraid to hit the deck, you gotta get the hard spots too. We let the sealer dry for about 30 minutes, which is just about enough time to properly clean your gun. If you sweat like a pig like me, here's a tip. Take a clean wiping towel, fold it into thirds, and tape it to your wrists, making a homemade wristband. Our temps are about 80 to 85 degrees and humid, and this really helps keep the perspiration from dripping onto the panels. Even though the base color is black, just like the sealer, it's a different material and slightly different color, so you need to thoroughly clean your gun every time you change materials, especially when you're using the same gun for multiple steps like we are. Aerosol injected cleaner from Eastwood is perfect for this and actually saves you money by not having to use up a bunch of cleanup thinner and having to dispose of it afterwards. It works on every part of the gun, but especially well on the air cap and air horns. It's critical to have these super clean. Boulevard Black Basecoat is next, and we're mixing it into a cup for an accurate mix ratio every time. Since the base is a 4-to-1 mix, I find the 4-to-1 column and pour from the left to the right. First with color, then with the catalyst. Remember, the 7 on the cup is not a mix ratio, just a level on the cup. Mixing this way gives you a perfect 4-to-1 mix ratio. We're tacking off the car again just in case there's overspray that we might kick up into the paint. Another shot onto the test panel tells me the gun is set up right and we can start spraying color. I use the same pattern spraying the base coat as I did the sealer, the same roadmap, but I'm using a 60 to 70% overlap and about 4 inches from the surface. You'll definitely get a feel for it as you read your pattern while you're spraying. To keep the hose out of the car, I usually have it over my shoulder and feed it into my spraying hand. This gives you much better control and keeps your air hose out of the paint. You can see here where skirting the car saves the shiny stuff on the bottom, and it also keeps from blowing debris from under the car up into the rest of the paint job. You can see I'm using a medium wet coat and not hosing the color on. There is no strength in the base coat, only pigment and resin, so there's no need and no useful purpose in applying big fat coats. Typically, I like to move from the bottom of the panels to the top. This is working against the airflow of the booth and helps eliminate dry spray on the doors or any other vertical surface. Just like on the roof, I use a push-pull method on the hood, pushing the paint into the middle and pulling it onto the other side. This makes sure I don't have dry spray in the middle that I'd have to cover up with more paint, because that can cause solvent trapping problems. I'm short, and I need a stool to finish the top edge of the hood, but that minor inconvenience is fine when we have the ability to paint the top and the bottom of the panels all at once. This saves us time and materials, but it's a little more work to get everything covered. With the first coat flashed off, which means dry to the touch, the second coat follows the same route as the first. Again, I work against the airflow of the booth. That way the overspray gets pulled across the freshly painted surfaces and cross-links back into the fresh coat and doesn't have the chance to become dry spray or dry overspray, which can really cause you problems. A magnetic gun holder in the booth can help keep your air hose off the ground, which keeps it clean. After the base is flashed, we let the color sit for about another 30 minutes to an hour to fully dry before we clear coat. You can see here that it's just color and has no gloss or strength to it. But the Concours Pro gun has handled both sealer and base coat perfectly. I couldn't be happier with this gun. Well, our base color is done. We've got complete hiding and coverage. But look at me. Paint job is work, folks, and there's more than one reason to wear a spray suit. Not only does it keep the overspray off of me, it keeps my sweat from dripping into that paint job. In the summertime, this is going to be even worse. If you're like me, if you're a sweater, well, get used to the safety gear because it's dual purpose. It protects you and it protects the Z-Sled. Since we're changing materials again, we thoroughly cleaned the gun again. But the Eastwood cleaning kit and aerosol injected cleaner make it super easy. Now we're 100% clean and ready to put clear coat through the same gun I put sealer and base color in, and I'm confident that this is not going to bleed any color into my clear. We're using the Eastwood Show Clear, which is a 4-to-1 mix ratio, but because the temperature is 80 degrees, we'll be adding the slow reducer, which means we'll be using a 4-to-1-to-1 column on the mixing cup. We're mixing a large amount because I know it takes 1.5 quarts to get around the car, so I'll be using the 3 as a reference to give myself enough for 2 coats. Remember, the 3 is just a reference, not an actual amount. With the clear added to the first 3 and the activator to the second 3, it's time to fill to the next 3 with reducer. As you can see, these cups from Eastwood make mixing easy, and you get a perfect ratio every time. Now it's time for a final wipe down with a tack rag. Pour the clear into the gun, and we get to start spraying. I like to wipe the hose with a tack rag between coats to make sure it's clean and doesn't deposit any debris. Every little bit helps. We test the gun and we're ready to go. The first thing I do is put a coat of clear on the paper to make sure no black overspray works its way onto the car and into my clear coat. Then I follow the same pattern I established when I sprayed the sealer and the color. This Concours Pro gun has worked great for everything I've sprayed. Primer, base coat, and now clear. Atomization is perfect and it's really a versatile gun. While spraying the third and final coat of Eastwood Show Clear, we found some debris in the paint. So with the tweezers from my booth box, I'm able to remove it and keep on spraying. The car is cleared and looks good, but the next morning we found a tiny defect in the clear, a little fisheye. And since it hasn't been 24 hours, the clear hasn't completely cured, so we can dip out a small drop of the overmix left over and dab it into the spot. It will cross-link back into the clear and become the same coating. After some sanding and buffing, it'll be completely unnoticeable. So now it's time to unmask the Z-Sled, ninja style. I cannot tell you how good it feels to have paint on Z-Sled. This is awesome because right now, even though there's a few more panels to paint, with the body under paint, now we can drop the engine and transmission in. We can measure for the drive shaft, the wiring harness, the HVAC system, interior, glass. All this stuff is now just a matter of reassembly. The hard work is done. And by gosh, it's worth it because I'm very happy with the bodywork. A black paint job hides nothing. And even though the bodywork is good, we've got some work to do on the clear coat. There's a little bit of dust and stuff. So coming up on Hands on Cars, we're going to show you some surface correction techniques and color sanding and buffing techniques that are going to show you how to make clear coat like this look perfect. So we're excited about it. I'm stoked. Z-Sled is a car again. Before we say goodbye, there's one more trick I want to show you. Now you saw that I had bagged the front in the booth with plastic, but before I did that, I sprayed the subframe down with a coating called liquid spray mask. It's designed to protect the parts from overspray. It's just a little bit of extra insurance, and it doesn't matter if overspray collected on this stuff because it sits on top of the liquid spray mask and protects my paint like this. You can see what happens. That's a nice coating right there, and it just comes right up. If you get this stuff wet, it turns to a soapy mess and just rinses off with just regular tap water. It's a great insurance policy. So make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube for more details on Z-Sled and upcoming episodes to where we teach you how to color sand and buff and make the finish perfect and finish out this car with the help of Eastwood products. For now, I'm Kevin Tetz. Thanks for watching Hands on Cars. Do the job right with the help of Eastwood.
On the next episode of Hands on Cars, Kevin buffs the Z-Sled and visits the AACA Museum in Hershey, Pennsylvania.